my name is Robin Lewis, and I'd love to speak for about up to 10 minutes. I'll keep it very short about the Great East Japan earthquake. Now, as some of you may know, today is the 10th anniversary, the 10th Memorial Day of the earthquake that happened here in 2011. And so we had the moment of silence just 2 hours ago. So there's a lot of events happening around Japan on this day. I'm going to quickly do a bit of a screen share here, so please bear with me for one moment. So obviously, to boil down something that was so huge and such a important moment in Japanese history into 10 minutes is basically impossible, but I thought I would touch upon some of the main lessons learned specifically for local governments and for people working at the local level, which will hopefully be useful and relevant to you in some way. So one thing about the earthquake in Japan was that it wasn't just an earthquake, it's often called the triple disaster. It's an earthquake, tsunami, and of course the Fukushima nuclear crisis. So it's a very complex kind of cascading disaster that occurred in 2011. And just to give you a broader context of one of the kind of frameworks that the DRM system in Japan works by, it's often categorized into three interlinking sections called jijo, which means individual self-reliance, kyojo, which is kind of community self-reliance, and then kojo, which is kind of government assistance. So the idea is that to build a resilient society, you have these three levels, and they're all robust and all interlinking. And what that means, to be a bit more concrete, is that you have individuals at the local level who are prepared, they're aware of their risk, they're doing things to be ready for the next big disaster. At the community level, that means schools, civil society organizations, they're also engaged in the conversation, they're taking action. And then the government, like fire department, police, rescue, all of these things are coordinated as well. So this is one of the bigger conceptual frameworks. And these are just some photos that kind of conceptualize or visualize that a bit better. So how did this huge triple disaster that occurred 10 years ago affect disaster risk reduction and resilience in Japan? I've picked up just a few things. And we could do a 5-day session on this topic, but just to name a few of the things that have arisen from this disaster is one is the issue around communicating risk. So a lot of lives were lost due to misunderstanding or underestimation of the tsunami height. So pre-2011, generally speaking, the warnings were made with numbers. So there'll be a tsunami of up to 3 meters, right? Or 1 meter. And when you think about 1 meter, that's maybe half my body. So you think, oh, that's nothing. I can withstand that. But obviously that's not the case. And so to reduce this risk of underestimating tsunami height, the Japanese government have introduced these 3 new levels. One is very large tsunami, one is large tsunami, and one is warning, right? And so it's without mentioning the numbers because that translates better to the everyday person. And if you go around the coastal areas, you'll see lots and lots of these kinds of signs and things on the bottom left that help people to understand where they are in relation to sea level and so on. Another thing that I personally saw a lot was the issue around inclusivity and emergency shelters. And again, this is very much down to the local governments in Japan. So, for example, making emergency shelters accessible to everyone, regardless of their gender, of their abilities, of their sexual orientation. Another one that people don't think about is pets. You know, if I have a dog, can I go down to the emergency shelter? In some cases you can't. So what you have to choose between your home and your pet. I mean, there's all kinds of problems that arise. And not just with the emergency shelters themselves, but also with the stock of emergency supplies. For example, there weren't sanitary products for women in many emergency shelters. There wasn't milk for kids. I mean, all kinds of challenges because of lack of inclusivity. Another one is with evacuation procedures. So roughly 2/3 of lives lost were over 60 years old. And so there's a disproportionate number of people who died who were elderly. And so Japan's rapidly aging population presents this challenge because, especially in the rural areas, you have a very high average age. And so ensuring that these people can evacuate safely is something that is being addressed currently across the country. Another one is around community-based DRI, specifically education in schools. Since 2011, there's been a lot more critical planning and drills held at the local level. There's one famous story called the Miracle of Kamaishi. Kamaishi is a small town in the northern part of Japan. And in this one town, the kids were extremely well drilled and educated. And only, I believe 4 out of 3,000 children were killed by the tsunami. And they were the ones who were leading the elderly people, the people with disabilities up the hill because they knew exactly what to do. And so this story about the miracle of Kamaishi is a very strong statement as to what can be done if education is done correctly at the local level. Another lesson learned as such is around multi-sector collaboration, and this sounds like a very generic term, and I'm sure many of you are already well aware of this, but what has been happening in the past 10 years is that many local governments, many companies, many civil society organizations are pre-planning. They're signing MOUs, memorandums of understanding. They're signing agreements. They're doing drills together. And so it's not about if a big earthquake happens, let's talk about what we should do. There are an increasing number of local governments who have now these partnerships in place prior to any disaster striking. There is one relatively well-known example called the Ishinomaki model. Ishinomaki is a town in the north of Japan as well. And in this situation, after the tsunami in 2011, there would be meetings every single day between civil society, that's the NGOs, the NPOs, with local government, like the Disaster Management Office, and also with the Social Welfare Council, which was intaking lots of volunteers from around the country. And so this kind of multi-stakeholder collaboration is often seen as a positive way of doing things post-emergency. And many of you may already be aware, but we do have a number of special days here in Japan. For example, we have National Disaster Prevention Day on the 1st of September. And every year across the country, there's all kinds of special events, there's special drills, all kinds of activities to raise awareness, and Tsunami Awareness Day as well in November. And these days are often, they're getting more and more traction across the country. One interesting thing as well is with the issue around preserving history and conveying messages to future generations. So if you go along the coastline that was hit by the tsunami, you'll see many of the structures are still standing there as a homage to the people who were killed, but also to teach people that this is how high the tsunami can come in the future. And there's many, as with many other countries in the world, there's these exhibition spaces and information booths to inform people about the risks that they face along the coastline. Nuclear power is an entire topic unto itself, but the legacy of the Fukushima crisis is very long lasting, and it's really not understood even today what the true impact is. But it's had a very large impact on nuclear power and how we manage nuclear risk across the country. So most of Japan's 54 reactors are now shut, but there are some that are restarting, and that whole conversation is moving forward quickly as well. Finally, I would say one of the last things that is really to be addressed is the issue around psychosocial needs. So if you go along the coastline, a lot of the buildings, a lot of the physical infrastructure has been rebuilt. Some of it is very concrete and very controversial in many ways. But one of the challenges that remains is around this mental health outcomes, including PTSD, depression, anxiety. And so there is still very much a strong need for continued psychosocial services in the areas affected by the tsunami. Now, what is really important, the reason why this is so critical is because, as you can see from this this graphic here that Japan is anticipating a lot of major large-scale earthquakes. So the more we can learn the lessons from 2011 at the local level, at the regional level, and at the national level, the more we can protect our assets and our people, which is most importantly. So that's it from me. That was 2011 earthquake in 10 minutes. I hope it was somewhat useful to you, and I'd be happy to have a discussion or a Q&A or something. But thank you very much for listening.